Well, in the last podcast, I interviewed my buddy Jeff, and he talked about connections with recovery that he had learned from martial arts. One phrase that he spoke about was the difference between taking a win-lose approach and a win-learn approach in a match. And I was so struck by the distinctions that I thought that we would take a whole podcast and flesh that out in more detail. So welcome aboard.
Guys ready?
When it comes to porn, are you stuck, spinning out, or slipping backwards in your life? If so, then welcome to the Finding Traction podcast, a show dedicated to those who are looking to gain recovery momentum away from porn and toward the life and relationships they have always hoped for. Now, here's your host, Vern Tomke.
Well, before we get into this win-lose versus win-learn, once again, I want to invite you to connect with me through the website, bandofbrothers.care. There you can get some free resource material to help you in your recovery journey. You also can find out more information about how to join coaching, whether that's group coaching, individual coaching. And I just love to hear from guys and how they're doing on their recovery journey, in particular around porn. And so you can email me at bandofbrothers.care@gmail.com. So, having said that, let's get back again to these two different approaches. The difference between a win-lose approach and a win-learn approach. Well, first of all, let me just state the obvious. One feels a whole lot more hopeful than the other, doesn't it? You know, think about it. With a win-lose approach, every time you relapse, you go from winning to losing. And every time you act out, you feel like, yes, you got it, a loser. And then it takes maybe a few days for you slowly to regain your sense of equilibrium. And then you go, okay, maybe I'm winning again. I think it also can be a bit of a misleading metric in this way. You could have a day where let's say you don't look at porn, but you're edging or you're scanning, you're white knuckling it. You aren't doing any self-care or connecting with other people. And yet, because you didn't cross some arbitrary line, you mistakenly interpret that day as a win. Last night we were talking about this in our group and this whole difference of approach and maybe drawbacks with a win-lose approach. And one guy, a take on it was this. He says, it feels to me like there's a whole lot of pride kind of baked into this approach. I guess that would be assuming that you're winning, but I guess you could feel like worm spit or something, or you were a zero if you were losing. So you're either 100 or a zero, which, you know, again, is a tough way to live. Another guy said, you know, this whole win-lose approach feels a little bit to me like recovery is a bit of like a roll of the dice. Sometimes I win, I roll my double sixes, but other times I only roll a 2 and a 3 and go, oh, well, I guess I got to just keep on rolling. You know, maybe next roll of the dice, I'll do better. So that's maybe that was just his take on this idea of a win-lose approach. The reason that I prefer to use the term win-learn is not just because it's more hopeful, but it obviously communicates this. Every fall is an opportunity to learn from your mistakes. This point brings up a lot of hard feelings for me because my quarterback threw 2 interceptions yesterday to the hated Green Bay Packers. So this is a very painful example for me. Now, the receivers didn't run their routes, but we'll leave that alone. You know, you see that in football, for example. You see even professional football players at the top of their games, they miss a read or they don't see the field properly and they throw an interception. Well, then what you see oftentimes following it is you see the quarterback sitting on the bench. Perhaps, they have these blue Microsoft Surface tablets, and they're going over, you see them going over what happened and how they can learn from it. Sometimes you will see their quarterback coach. Believe it or not, this level, they all still have quarterback coaches. And oftentimes they're sitting with their quarterback coach right, when they're sitting on the bench right after they come off the field, and they're going over the last play, the one they threw an interception. They're learning. Well, that's when, assuming they're not, throwing a Tom Brady and just throwing the tablet down and smashing it. I couldn't resist on that one, but then again, Mike McCarthy did that yesterday too, so we won't go too far there. But let's just say this: it would be a mistake to think that just because you've fallen, that you're automatically going to learn. So if a quarterback throws an interception and he goes back to the bench and says, "Well, I learned my lesson." Well, that's not necessarily the case. You will only learn from a relapse or a fall or an interception if you use it as a learning experience. In other words, there is the opportunity to learn, but not everybody takes that opportunity. And I guess I spoke a little bit about this on a previous episode. It was called Last Time, Next Time. And what I said was, unless you are willing to look at your slips or your relapses through the eyes of learning, you won't learn. Your next time will be exactly like your last time. And if you're not prepared to do anything different, you will have the same results. It's like a quarterback says, "Well, I'm going to throw exactly the same kind of pass in exactly the same kind of situation." Well, he's going to throw another interception. To put it a different way, I guess I'm surprised sometimes how much resistance I hear from people to actually make the necessary changes that would be just a learning outgrowth from their last relapse. Learning is as learning does. You're only learning if you recognize what went wrong and you put the learning steps, the change steps in place. But, and this is where the hopeful part comes in, if people are willing to leverage their failures into an opportunity to learn, it can lead to both hopeful and redemptive learning outgrowths out of something that was a negative experience. Now, I recognize that you could, win, learn, yeah. And it can just be this flippant sort of, well, there I go again. I guess I won't do that again. I learned my lesson. No, I think learning lessons take hard work. They not only take a level of seriousness that we talked about where you're actually willing to change the patterns of your life or the ways you ended up falling last time, but they also, require real thoughtful thinking into, okay, what can I learn in this situation? What would be a better way of dealing with this? You could say, I get you're saying you've got to do it, but can you be more specific? What are some practical ways then that you can take a relapse and you can apply this win-learn model to be more successful moving forward? Now, towards that end, I want to throw by you a new metaphor that I'm working on. And last night in group, we were talking about this idea, and I think for some of you it could be helpful. So let me try it on you and see. Maybe this can give you some. It might help you with an approach to take. Well, one way to apply this win-learn approach is to see your porn activities as a bit of an interstate freeway. You know, you've traveled on this freeway many times, and by now this freeway has a whole bunch of lanes, which kind of fits with the whole brain science idea of you've developed these neural pathways, a freeway in your brain, so to speak. So let's take that idea and go, okay, so we have a freeway, just like a freeway. And in this particular word picture, you have a freeway that runs through a city. Now, as the freeway goes through the city, maybe it cuts the city in half, what there is there's a number of on-ramps throughout the city as you go along, which are on-ramps by which you can access that freeway. You know, usually there's different on-ramp numbers and exit numbers, but we're just worrying about the on-ramps here. So it's the same freeway, but there's different ways that you go onto that freeway or you access that freeway. Now, I would submit to you that there are a number of different on-ramps that lead you down onto the freeway of porn. Now, some sorts of on-ramps could be just external factors. Your wife heads out grocery shopping. Certain apps on your laptop or on your phone. Social media. An unfiltered computer at work. The person who serves you at Starbucks. Those are all sorts of, now we often have used the word triggers, but those are objective external on-ramps that often basically allow you, or they give you a way to access going down onto the porn on-ramp. They're tried and true ways that often put an exit or an on-ramp right in front of you. Now, other on-ramps could be more internal or emotional, like boredom or agitation or loneliness or stress or anger or sadness. And whenever you experience a strong emotion that fits one of those categories, perhaps, what it does is you want to head down using that on-ramp onto the freeway of porn to medicate or escape those negative feelings. Because that freeway gives you an escape. You forget those negative feelings. Or other examples of on-ramps could be maybe ways that you've learned to meet legitimate needs for things like approval or affirmation or acceptance or significance. Those are all real needs, but you've learned to try to meet those in faulty ways, illegitimate ways. The needs are valid, but your approach is self-defeating, and it takes you back. Though when you're trying to meet those needs in illegitimate ways, those are other examples of on-ramps. You say, wow, it sounds like there's a whole bunch of different possible on-ramps that are at play in this general struggle I have with porn. And the answer would be yes. That's why it's not a simple fix for most guys. It's not just do this one thing. There's a whole lot, oftentimes, of various on-ramps that are at play in your life. Now, learn. Here's one way that you can learn to be more successful. And that is to start by going, what are all of those different on-ramps that I have developed in my life that lead me to porn, the freeway of porn? And if you're like me, there's way more than 5. There's probably more than 10. And there's a whole lot of them. And I really encourage guys, one of the more recent things I'm doing is saying, I'd like you to try to sit down and itemize as many on-ramps that you can think of. Now, sometimes if you look at your most recent relapse, you might be able to point to one, maybe two. And what we're going to do is we are going to put up a barrier in front of that on-ramp. And what we're going to do is we are going to develop and reroute the road away from that on-ramp, and we're going to move it in a different direction towards a brand new road that we're going to build. A road which takes me to a better place, that's better for me. So over time, I'm going to close off old on-ramps and reroute my vehicle to a new, better highway. So, just to go back again, on-ramps are those things that we would answer whenever I feel this, I move in the direction of that porn freeway. It's an on-ramp. Whenever this happens, whenever this situation presents itself to me, and you're going to take some time and you're going to itemize those things. Again, there could be a whole bunch. Maybe, for example, you say this, you know what? Maybe it might be this simple. There's that certain app on my iPhone. I have that app there. Mostly it's okay, but sometimes I get a little bit bored. Oh, there's an on-ramp. And then I pull up that app. There's another on-ramp. That's an app, one, and app plus the other on-ramp. And then that begins me down the route onto the freeway. Well, you say, well, that's pretty simple. The app goes, the app store goes, and now that on-ramp is closed off, and now I can choose a different route to travel. Okay, let's go to the other part of that. It's one thing to remove an app, but how do I remove boredom from my life if boredom is a classic on-ramp for me? Well, again, it just takes a bit of, you got to recognize it first of all, but then it just takes a bit of creativity. It could be as simple as saying, you know what, I have a novel with me at all times, which I do. And whenever I start running out of things to do, I just, I have a novel that I'm reading. I'm right now reading a 7 novel series on the Mughal Empire. It's historical fiction. It's that's kind of in the northwestern part of what is now India. Great novel. Alex Rutherford is the author. But I have that, and I'm working on book 2 right now. And so whenever I start feeling a little bit bored, I have that novel with me, and I just pick up where I'm at. Right? So identified boredom. Now I have another thing. Or it could be I get up and I just go around and walk around the block once, or I just get up and do something. So boredom is the identifiable on-ramp. And now I've developed some new practices towards a new highway that can lead me to a new, better freeway that I want to develop. You get the idea? That's an example of win-learn. Each time I learn from each mistake, each interception, each relapse. Now, it's, again, possible that there's all sorts of different scenarios that come into place. But eventually, it's usually the same old thing. And then it comes down to us simply wanting to learn from them and grow through them. So, when it comes to win-learn, I want to challenge you that this journey of recovery is really a journey of learning. I have 3 kids, and when my kids were younger, we used to take them on trips to the library. 2 of my kids would come back with these huge stacks of books. My 3rd child didn't want to bring any books home. He'd say, well, I'll read my brother or sister's books. But Other times he would say, I don't want to pay fines like the rest of you do, which is another whole story. But now it's funny because that child is probably the most voracious of all of my 3 kids in terms of learning. He learns from all sorts of things. But it's interesting. It's usually not through books, but he reads through blogs and podcasts and all sorts of things, Reddit, other examples. He is a lifelong learner. He loves to study different areas and learn different facts, and he's a lifelong learner. Well, if you're going to be successful in recovery, you need to be a lifelong learner. It's one of the things, or one of the reasons why I say just starting to listen to podcasts was one of the top 2 or 3 aids that made the biggest difference in my recovery, because I began to learn and grow in a way that worked really well for me. So, the point of win-learn means to be a lifelong learner. As we change, our recovery needs to change. We learn some new things. New things crop up. Technology is always changing, and we need to learn new strategies. So, when does the learning end? Well, when does recovery end? It's a process. And it's going to be with me. Hopefully the learning will be with me for a long time. So, till next time, keep learning, keep growing. Here's to developing a win-learn approach to your recovery. We'll see you next time.